The Egyptian Origin of the Ark of the Covenant by S.B.Noegel. Abstract. The best non-Israelite parallel to the Ark of the Covenant comes not from Mesopotamia or Arabia, but from Egypt. The sacred bark was a ritual object deeply embedded in the Egyptian ritual and mythological landscapes. It was carried aloft in processions or pulled in a sledge or a wagon. Its purpose was to transport a god or a mummy, and sometimes to dispense oracles. The Israelite conception of the ark probably originated under Egyptian influence in the late Bronze Age. The Ark of the Covenant holds a prominent place in the biblical narrative surrounding the Israelites' exodus from Egypt. Its central role as a vehicle for communicating with Yahweh and as a portable priestly reliquary distinguished it from all other aspects of the early cult. In varying detail, biblical texts ascribe to the ark a number of functions and powers, which have led scholars to see the Bible's portrayal of the ark as the result of historical development and theological reinterpretation. While some have looked to Mesopotamia and pre-modern Bedouin societies for parallels to the ark, the parallels have remained unconvincing and have contributed to the general view that the ark was uniquely Israelite. Today, I propose that we can gain greater insight into the Israelite ark and the narratives in which it appears by looking to a hitherto overlooked parallel, the Egyptian sacred bark. Ark of the Covenant. Biblical texts describe the Ark of the Covenant as a sacred object containing 5 major features. The first is a wooden box, Hebrew aron, roughly 4 foot by 2.5 by 2.5, and overlaid with gold. Footnote: the word setim, acacia, is a loan from Egyptian. See Muchiki, 1999, 256. There are a number of species of acacia that grow in Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula, the Judean Desert, and the Negev. End of footnote. The second is a lid, Hebrew kaporeth, made entirely of gold, not plated like the box. Footnote: the lid also is translated mercy seat, based on an etymological association. However, the word kaporeth simply means covering. End of footnote. Which contains a molding running along its top edge. Its third component is a pair of gold cherubim, i.e. sphinxes. Footnote: on the Egyptian origin of this creature, see already Albright, 1938, and now Mettinger, 1999. Attestations of the Assyrian cognate Kuraibu do not permit a precise or a consistent description of the creature. Thus, some appear to have animal heads, while others have human heads. Nevertheless, the Kuraibu commonly are described as fashioned images that either stand at entrances to portals or face each other. The use of the cuneiform Dingir sign marks them as divine. Even in the Bible, there is some variation concerning this creature. Thus, the cherubim on the ark have 2 wings, Exodus 25:20, 37:9, but 4 wings in Ezekiel's vision, Ezekiel 1:6. The closest parallels are the sarcophagus of Ahiram, king of Byblos, and an ivory found at Megiddo. Both objects are highly Egyptianized and depict a king seated on a cherubim flanked throne. The latter item also features a winged solar disk and lotus offering. See Kyrillis, 1969, 41 to 81. Many objects found at Megiddo dating to this period evince Egyptian influence, if not also a presence. See Novatech, 2011. On other possible parallels, including a stone throne from Lebanon and a divine statue from Cyprus, see Zwickau, 1999, 101 to 105. On archaeological evidence for the Israelite cult, see Zwickau, 1994. End of footnote. That rest on top of the lid and face each other with their wings touching. Note that the lid was understood as God's throne, whereas the box was viewed as his footstool, e.g. 1 Chronicles 28:2, 2 Chronicles 9:18, Psalms 99:5, 132 and 7. The ark's fourth feature was its wooden poles, which were inserted through 4 gold rings and never removed. Footnote: on 2 occasions, oxen pulled the ark on a newly constructed wagon. 1 Samuel 6 and 7, 2 Samuel 6 and 3. Though this was not ordinary practice. End of footnote. Only the priestly tribe of Levi was permitted to carry the ark, and even then, only after they had veiled it. Exodus 40 verse 3, 40:21. Footnote: moreover, the priests were forbidden from looking at the Kaporeth lid, hence it was veiled. Only the high priest could look at the Kaporeth on Yom Kippur, provided he was undertaking a special rite and has changed his garments. Leviticus 16:4, on the veil and the lid. See Border Rule 2006. End of footnote. No one of non-priestly descent was allowed to touch it. The ark's fifth feature was its contents, the tablets of the law. Deuteronomy 10:1 to 5. Aaron ha-berith, Exodus 25:22. Aaron ha-eduth, a jar of manna, Exodus 16:33-34, and possibly the rod of Aaron, Hebrews 9:4, Numbers 17:10. Footnote: according to Josephus' Jewish Wars, the innermost sanctum was empty. End of footnote. In addition to serving as a reliquary, texts attribute 2 other functions to the ark. Most prominently, it served as the symbolic presence of Yahweh. In times of war, Yahweh led as the Lord of hosts, seated upon the cherubim, surrounded by standard bearers preceding him. Each standard was topped with a banner representing an Israelite tribe or family line. Numbers 2:1-34, 10 verse 35, Psalms 132 verse 8. Footnote: in Exodus 17:15, Moses built an altar to Yahweh after his battle against the Amalekites and named it Yahweh is my banner. The identification of Yahweh with a banner is reminiscent of the Egyptian hieroglyphic representation of Neter, God with a banner. End of footnote. As the symbolic presence of Yahweh, the ark was connected to miracles and oracles. Thus, when the priest carried the ark into the Jordan River, the waters parted. Joshua 3 verses 8 to 17. And Moses, Phineas, Samuel, Saul. Footnote: 1 Chronicles 13:3 suggests that people did not seek oracles from the ark during Saul's reign. End of footnote. And David each received divine direction from the ark. Exodus 25:22, 30 and 6, Numbers 7 verse 89, Judges 20 verses 27 to 28, 1 Samuel 3 verse 3, 1 Samuel 14 verse 18, 2 Samuel chapter 2 verse 1, 5 verse 19, 11:11, 15:24. Footnote: the LXX of 1 Samuel 14:18 reads ephod. The instrument of divination in 2 Samuel is less clear, but Vandertoon and Houtman 1994 argue that ephod here stands for ark, and that the ark functioned for divination. They also opine that there were multiple arks in the region whose existence was blurred by later Deuteronomist editing. If the authors are correct in arguing that the ark that David brought to Jerusalem was not a national symbol, but a Saulite cult object, then perhaps we should look to the tribe of Benjamin as the original locus for the object. End of footnote. Before the temple was built, the ark stayed at a number of sanctuaries, including Gilgal, Joshua chapter 7 verse 6, Shechem, Joshua chapter 8 verse 33, Bochim, Judges chapter 2 verses 1 through 5, Bethel, Judges chapter 21 verse 27, Shiloh, 1 Samuel 3 verse 3, Kiriath Jearim, 1 Samuel 7 verses 1 and 2, and Gibeon, 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 4, 1 Chronicles chapter 16 verses 37 to 42, and 21 verse 29, and 2 Chronicles chapter 1 verses 3 and 4. During the visits, Yahweh would accept sacrifices and bless his sanctuaries. Finally, the ark acquired a ritual function. On Yom Kippur, the high priest would sprinkle bull's blood onto and in front of the ark's lid. Leviticus chapter 16 verse 14. Previously proposed parallels to the ark. Scholars have cited two objects as possible parallels for the ark. The first is a divine Palanquin, as seen notably in the Assyrian reliefs of Tiglath-Pileser III, 744 to 727 BCE. Footnote: Zwickau, 1999, page 106, also suggests a parallel with Egyptian divine palanquins, but he appears to reject it because the Bible refers to the Aron as a footstool. He does not consider a connection to the barks. See also Zwickau, 1994. End of footnote. The panel shows the king's seizure of foreign gods from their temples. Figure 17:1. Footnote: the relief, which is on display in the British Museum, was photographed by the author. End of footnote. While some of the gods sit on thrones and might have served as a source of oracles, a number of differences remain. No poles were used to transport them, and there are no boxes and no lids. They were not covered in gold, nor do any of them contain relics or cherubim. There is no evidence that the statues were carried into battle. Finally, there appear to have been no restrictions on who could touch them. A second object previously compared to the ark is the Bedouin Utfa, also called a Mamal, Abu Dur, Markab, and Kuba. Figure 17.2. The image of the Utfa appears in Musil, 1928, page 573. The Utfa, Mamal, Abu Dur, Markab, and Kuba have been treated rather loosely as a collective by earlier biblicists who proposed them as parallels to the ark, e.g. Morgenstern, 1942, DeVoe, 1965, 9, 296 and 297, and since that time they have been adopted somewhat uncritically into the scholarly literature. Nevertheless, the items are rather distinct in appearance and function, and each has its own history. The Utfa generally refers to the hooded camel saddle used by married women of Sudan, Arabia, Tripoli, etc. It cannot be traced to pre-Islamic times. See Robinson, 1931b. Tradition places the origin of the Mahmal in Mamluk Cairo in the 13th century CE. See Robinson, 1931a. The Merkab and Abu Dur appear to be synonyms for the ostrich feather litter that sits upon camels. They are recorded in pre-modern Bedouin society, but not pre-Islamic society. See Musil, 1928, pages 571 to 574. The Egyptian Merkab cannot be dated before the 11th century CE, when the Persian traveler Nasir I Khusrau described its use in conjunction with a Nile inundation ceremony. See Sanders, 1994, page 103. Only the Kuba dates to pre-Islamic times, as it is represented on the Temple of Bel at Palmyra, 1st century CE. Nevertheless, all of these litters are tent-like structures, and thus they are more fruitfully compared to the tabernacle. See Homan, 2002, pages 90 to 94. Homan does not discuss the Abu Dur. The Hebrew cognate Kuba in Numbers chapter 25 verse 8 also refers to a tent. End of footnote. It accompanied tribes into battle and signaled the presence of the divine. However, the Bedouin transported them on horses or camels. It contained no box, no lid, and no poles. Some were inscribed with spells and Quranic verses, but they never served as reliquaries or as the throne and footstool of God. They were not overlaid in gold, and they contained no cherubim. There also were no restrictions on who could touch them. While the Palanquin and Bedouin objects offer some parallels, the dissimilarities limit their usefulness as analogues. Indeed, Menahem Haran long ago observed that the ark's origins must be sought not in nomadic life, but in a sedentary community, since the Israelite priest carried it on foot. Haran, 1985, page 270. Moreover, as Michael Homan has shown, Homan 2002, pages 113 and 114, the strongest parallels for the tabernacle in which the ark was placed are ancient Egyptian military and funerary tents, including the tent-like coverings for funerary barks. Footnote. Curiously, Homan, 2002, page 113, does not discuss a possible parallel between the ark and the Egyptian bark, but instead he notes that Ramses' golden throne appears in the Kadesh record as flanked by falcon wings, just as the ark is flanked by winged cherubim. Moreover, Homan, 2002, pages 145 to 147, notes that the construction of the tabernacle's frame employs the term kerasim, thin boards, a word of nautical importance that elsewhere, i.e. Ezekiel chapter 27 verse 6, refers to the main cabin on a boat. See also Kitchen, 1993, pages 119 to 129. End of footnote. This suggests even greater propriety in looking to Egypt for an analog. Footnote. We may add to this the fact that biblical tales set in Egypt often show a close knowledge of Egyptian practices and beliefs, and in some cases draw upon Egyptian literary traditions. See E.G. Sarner, 1986, and The Brief Discussion by Corid, 1997, pages 23 to 32, and his bibliography. End of footnote. Egyptian sacred barks. With this in mind, I should like to propose that the Egyptian sacred bark offers a more compelling and complete parallel for the ark. Of course, the bark was not merely a boat, but a sacred ritual object deeply embedded in the ritual and mythological landscapes of the Egyptians. Though they resembled boats, they rarely, if ever, were set in water. Even when they needed to cross the Nile, they were loaded onto barges. Usually, they were carried by hand, or in some cases dragged on a sledge or placed on a wagon. Figure 17.3. Figure 17.3. Barks on stands with carrying poles. Medinet Habu. Footnote. Photograph of sacred barks at Medinet Habu by the author. End of footnote. The bark's most basic function was to transport gods and mummies. When transporting gods, the bark was fitted with a gold-plated naos containing a divine image seated on a heart block throne. Footnote. On the What block throne, block throne, and the lion throne, see Coleman, 2008. For a comparative work on thrones, see Metzger, 1985. End of footnote. Which was veiled with a thin canopy of wood or cloth. Figure 17.4. Figure 17.4. Veiled bark of Amun, Karnak. The veiled bark of a moon here comes from a relief at Karnak photographed by the author. When transporting the dead, it carried the sarcophagus within a covered, gold-plated catafalque, figure 17.5. Figure 17.5. Bark on catafalque, tomb of Usarhat. Footnote: the photograph of the bark transporting the catafalque and the tomb of Usarhat, TT 56, was taken by the author. End of footnote. There is no one type of sacred bark, but rather many variations on a theme, each with its own set of accoutrement. Footnote: see Gottlicher, 1992, pages 13 to 75, who divides the cultic barks into four basic types, those belonging to districts, states, gods, or of non-locale or unspecified nature, with each category containing many variations. Most of the barks are given epithet-like names, though the general term for bark appears to have been worth, perhaps related to the verb to be separated, secluded, segregated. See WAS 1982, page 272. End of footnote. Many barks were decorated with protective cherubim, such as the nails of the bark of Amun found on Seti I mortuary temple in Kurana. Figure 17.6, left, and the bark of Horus in the temple at Edufu, figure 17.6, on the right. Figure 17.6, Naoi containing cherubim. Like the Ark of the Covenant, sacred barks were carried on poles by priests, the so-called pure ones, who had performed purification rituals in order to hoist the bark. Though most Egyptian rituals were never witnessed by the public, the procession of the sacred bark was an important exception. It was the focus of an intense series of festivals throughout the year, as many as 5 to 10 per month, which involved loud music and dancing. Footnote: Stadler 2008. On Theban barks, see Bell 1985, pages 251 to 294. End of footnote. During the celebrations, priests carried the bark from one shrine to another and made stops along the way, during which they dramatized mythological scenes. The route and length of the processions varied depending on the gods they carried and their mythologies. The bark also gave oracles. While resting at one of the stations, it could be consulted by written oracles, and while en route during the procession, it could be asked the question to which it would respond yes or no by bowing fore or aft. Some priests marched before the bark, wafting incense, and others alongside and behind. Some bore standards representing gnomes, much like the tribal procession of the Ark of the Covenant. Barta, 1965-66. While I know of no sacred bark whose footstool contained relics, the placing of oaths beneath the feet of statues is attested. Thus, in a letter from Ramses II to the Hittite king Hattusilus III, we find the following reference: "The writing of the covenant that I made to the great king, and which the king of Hattu has made with me, lies beneath the feet of the god Ra. The great gods are witnesses to it." Footnote: a copy of the letter also was placed at the feet of the Hittite god Teshub. On the correspondence between these kings, see Edel, 1994. For the Egyptian text of the treaty, see Kitchen, 1971, Edel, 1983. Note that Beckman, 1996, treats the god in the broken portion of the letter as the Hittite storm god. End of footnote. Scholars have long likened this practice to the placing of the covenantal tables in the ark's footstool. Footnote: see already Herman, 1908. The platforms on which arks were placed also sometimes stored text. Thus, spell 64 of the Book of Going Forth by Day, lines 25 and 26, concludes by noting that the spell was discovered by a master worker in a plinth belonging to the god of the Henu bark, i.e. Sokar or Horus. P. London, BMEA 10477. Moreover, in the 18th dynasty, the term STWRT, great seat, which usually referred to the throne of a king or a god, came to be used for the pedestal on which one rested a divine bark, or the bark shrine itself. Eventually, it became a metonym for the temple. See McLean, 2007, pages 88 to 89. Herman, 1908, 299 to 300, also draws attention to the parallel. In 1 Samuel chapter 10 verse 25, Samuel also places a scroll containing the duties of kingship before the ark. End of footnote. In addition, from the 18th dynasty well into the Roman period, Egyptians fashioned statues of the god Ptah, Sokar Osiris, standing upright on their own coffins. Figure 17:7. Figure 17:7. Ptah Sokar Osiris figure standing on coffin. Footnote: the late period exemplar shown here is courtesy of the British Museum. And the footnote: of interest here is that the coffins often house copies of the books of the dead, or small corn mummies. While the Ramside letter and statute are not exact parallels to the ark, they share the concept of text placed beneath the feet of a god. Like their divine counterparts, funerary barks functioned as a means of transport and mythological invocation. However, rather than transport images, they ferried the deceased to their tombs. As in the festivals, loud music accompanied burial processions. These processions too were public, though the number of attendees naturally varied. Footnotes. Teeter, 2011, page 57, remarks, festivals also illustrated how little separation there was between the concepts of funerary and non-funerary practices. For example, festivals of Osiris, the god of the afterlife, were celebrated in the Karnak temple and recorded in detail at the temple of Hathor at Dendra, structures that are not usually associated with mortuary cults. And a footnote. The bark's trip to the tomb invoked the journey of the sun as it sailed to the land of the west, like Ra in his solar bark. Footnote. The solar god rowed one boat during the day and another at night. On the orientation of these boats, see Thomas, 1956, pages 56 to 79. And a footnote. The deceased hoped to sail on a cycle of renewal and emerge with him at dawn. Even from this cursory treatment, it should be clear that the ark and the bark share much in common in both design and function, and each in its own way was connected to a historicized mythology of return. Of course, I am not suggesting that the Ark of the Covenant was in fact a bark, only that the bark served as a model which the Israelites adapted for their own needs. Thus, the Israelites conceived of the ark not as an Egyptian boat with a prow and stern and oars. Footnote. Of course, the Israelites dispensed with the Egyptian practice of placing an image of the god's head on the prow and stern. End of footnote. But as a rectangular object, more akin to the riverine boat that informs the shape of Noah's Ark. Footnote. The term for Noah's Ark is Tebeh, Genesis chapter 6, verse 14. It is also used for the small chest into which the infant Moses was floated to safety. Exodus chapter 2, verses 3, and chapter 2, verse 5.